Today we're looking at a Daredevil story for the first time in 50 episodes, which means we're probably due for a little bit of a refresh. In 1998, Marvel Comics launched the Marvel Knights comic imprint with a new Daredevil series, the first story arc being written by Kevin Smith and drawn by the imprint's editor-in-chief, Joe Quesada. Quesada continued on art for the second story arc with David Mack, creator of the mega-popular indie comic Kabuki. In episode 23, I covered the third Daredevil story arc titled Wake Up, which followed around Daily Bugle reporter Ben Urich as he tried to locate the whereabouts of a low-level supervillain named Leapfrog. Now, the events of Wake Up ran concurrent with the Mack and Quesada storyline, which was titled Parts of a Whole, which means that in order to set the stage for today's story, I kind of have to spoil the ending to Parts of a Whole. Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, was put on trial for his many crimes. Fisk was acquitted, but got shot while exiting the courthouse. Fisk survived the attack, but the resulting trauma has left him blind. After Wake Up, which was only a 3-issue story, Bendis would leave and write an unrelated series called Daredevil Ninja, and then writer Bob Gale, best known for the movie Back to the Future, would come on to write a story arc. Then in issue 26, Bendis would return and team up with writer Alex Maleev for an epic storyline that would come to define Daredevil for the new millennium. And today we're looking at the first part of that epic. This is Daredevil Volume 4, Underboss. Wilson Fisk is confronted by Sammy Silk, the son of a mafia boss from New Jersey. Silk accuses Fisk of losing his touch and being unwilling to do as necessary. Silk then gives the order and the Kingpin's underlings begin stabbing their former boss in the back. Fisk is then left to bleed to death. This has roots that go back a couple weeks earlier, as Matt Murdock had just finished arguing a case involving a company run by Silk's father that was making designer methamphetamines. As he and Foggy Nelson exited the courthouse and got into a vehicle, Murdock was approached by a hooded man, who then exploded. The man who attacked Foggy Nelson and Matt Murdock is Nitro, the alias of Robert Hunter, a man who was genetically altered by the alien race known as the Kree, and as a result now has the ability to explode and reform his body. The explosion leaves Matt disoriented. His heightened senses are going haywire. He locates Foggy, who is briefly knocked out but is otherwise unharmed. Foggy points out that Nitro needs to be stopped before he does this again. Matt changes into his Daredevil outfit and goes after Nitro. Daredevil manages to track down the criminal but struggles in trying to fight the hitman. Matt's still shaken from the explosion. Eventually, Daredevil gets the upper hand just as the police arrive, though an overzealous rookie shoots and wounds Nitro in the process. Matt checks up on Foggy in the hospital, and the two conclude that there can only be one person behind this, the Kingpin. Daredevil confronts Fisk, but the Kingpin denies any involvement in the attack, pointing out that if he had been involved in this, Matt would already be dead. Daredevil's built-in lie detector verifies Fisk's story, but it also detects the heartbeat of Sammy Silk. Now at this point of the story, we jump back even further to when Sammy Silk first arrived in New York City. Sammy was in a bar talking with some friends of his father and wanted to talk to the Kingpin. Sammy then recognized an old friend from his childhood entering the bar, Richard Fisk. Returning to the present, Ben Urich gets a phone call. Wilson Fisk is dead. The next part of this story was part of a gimmick that Marvel ran at the time called Nuff Said. Basically, this, along with issues of The Incredible Hulk, Amazing Spider-Man, Black Panther, and others, were released with no spoken dialogue. Matt Murdock returns to his office where he finds a note from an ex-girlfriend detailing the price on his head. Whether or not she intends to collect remains unknown. Murdock then finds a discarded sword and begins inspecting it when he suddenly feels the burn of a rifle's laser sighting on his forehead. Matt tosses his billy club at the sniper that's stationed across the street from his building. Murdock then changes into his Daredevil costume and takes down the sniper. Daredevil then detects another killer's heartbeat, and this person is taking aim with a boomerang. The spooked thug takes off, and Daredevil manages to catch him, and after turning the two attempted killers over to the police, Matt begins to detect someone else as stalking him. Someone he has a history with. Okay, roll call time. Obviously, the note is from Elektra, Matt Murdock's ex-girlfriend turned ninja assassin. After that, the sniper on the roof is ex-CIA agent J.R. Walker, who goes by the codename Shotgun. After that, the boomerang villain is the, well, aptly named Boomerang, a Australian-born former baseball pitcher who got thrown out of the league for accepting bribes. And last but not least, Matt senses the idea that he is being stalked by his longtime nemesis, Bullseye, the assassin for whom any object in his hand becomes a deadly weapon. And if you recall, I covered Bullseye a bit more in depth in episode 10 of the Random Trade Review, in which I covered the series Dark Reign Hawkeye. In Switzerland, Vanessa Fisk receives word on her husband and rushes to the U.S. It turns out the Kingpin's death is just a cover, and he's merely in a coma. Knowing that her husband is still at risk, Vanessa makes an arrangement to have Wilson transported to Switzerland. Jumping back to a few months earlier, Sammy Silk got his meeting with Wilson Fisk. Fisk agreed to Sammy taking over the drug trade in Hell's Kitchen, and reluctantly accepted any further help from Silk's family. Due to the blindness, it's not any sort of territorial encroachment. However, when Silk asks for some help to take care of Matt Murdock, Fisk emphatically says no, Matt Murdock is to be left alone. Silk then went back to the bar to complain about his rejection. It was then that Richard Fisk called his old buddy over for a drink. Returning to the present, Vanessa Fisk wants to know one thing. Was her son behind the attack on her husband? If there is someone who can truly claim that they hold power over Wilson Fisk, it will be his wife, Vanessa. She's tried on several occasions to lure him away from the world of organized crime, and though those attempts were unsuccessful, he has defaulted to her demands more often than not. As for the couple's son, Richard Fisk, well, you may recall way back in episode 28 of the Random Trade Review, where I covered Morbius the Living Vampire, that there was a criminal persona, a wannabe kingpin, if you will, called the Rose. Well, Richard Fisk was the originator of that persona, and as the Rose, he tried several times to undermine his father's criminal empire. It turned out that Richard Fisk told Sammy Silk about Matt Murdock being Daredevil. The revelation incensed Silk. With such information, why not just take Murdock out permanently? I guess Silk never read Born Again. Richard and Silk began conspiring. Richard tells Sammy that this is his time to make the move. Sammy Silk is well liked, and so the Kingpin's underlings might be willing to flip. The two put their plan into motion. Silk got to several of the Kingpin's lackeys and offered them a bigger cut of the action if they turned. He also contacted his father and a few other crime bosses with the intent of creating a criminal empire from New York to Pittsburgh. Returning to the present, Daredevil talks with Ben Urich. Urich is sure that Wilson Fisk's death is just a smokescreen. Daredevil inspected the scene of the attack and found blood, which doesn't mean death. Urich then points out that this could mean whoever took out the Kingpin might also be behind the hit now on Matt Murdock's head. Meanwhile, Silk and his co-conspirators celebrate. That celebration is short-lived as Richard Fisk returns to his apartment to find his mother waiting for him. Richard tries to defend his actions, saying that Wilson Fisk held both of them back in a world of evil for so long. Now he and his mother are free. Vanessa tells Richard that for all of Wilson's fault, he was always a man of conviction, a man who stood for principle. Richard, on the other hand, has always been a sniveling little coward. Vanessa then pulls out a gun and kills Richard. As she leaves, Vanessa gives the order, and across New York, the conspirators are all taken out by those who are still truly loyal to the Kingpin. Except for Sammy Silk, he goes on the run, and he desperately calls his father for help, but even dear old Dad has turned his back on Sammy Silk. With no other choice, Silk goes to the FBI. Silk wants to go into witness protection, but considering everything he's done, the feds want something really big from Sammy Silk. Sammy only has one thing, that he knows who Daredevil really is. He's a blind lawyer from Hell's Kitchen named Matt Murdock. And so ends Daredevil, Volume 4, Underboss. Now, the story does kind of continue a little bit later on. Like I said, this was only part of an epic storyline. And we will probably tackle those ones later, but what did I think about this part of the story? Well, it's pretty darn good. Really good, to be more precise. There's really great characterization throughout all this, some really intricate storytelling. I think characters like Sammy Silk, Richard Fisk, Vanessa Fisk, even Daredevil are done pretty spot on. And it's all complemented by the grittiness of Alex Malev's artwork. If there are any drawbacks, well, let's face it, this reads kind of more like a Kingpin story than a Daredevil story. But like I said, it's part of a much bigger scope, so I think it's okay to maybe not always focus on Daredevil in this scenario. Also, the constant jumping back from the present to the past, to the present to the past, to the present to the past, to the past to the past, does get a little repetitive and sometimes kind of hard to follow what's going on when. But those are kind of minor quibbles, so I'm going to give Daredevil Volume 4 Underboss a B. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review. Just a sec. Hey guys, want to recommend a book to be placed in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box? Well, check out my Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcapproductions, or just check the link in the description below and see how you can help make that happen.